Hi, I'm Jay from Real Street Performance. This is Pedro with the Baltic Supra. Today we're going to take apart this engine. This is the engine that's been in his Supra for the past year or so. It lacks oil pressure. So he had made numerous runs with around 50 PSI of oil pressure where it should be closer to 100. But when he was cutting the oil filter open and looking, the oil filter was staying clean and he kept running the car. And then recently it has gone to a very low oil pressure where he said it will only make like 10 PSI. So something's wrong. We're gonna find it and fix it.
That sounds like a plan. Like Jay said, this motor's been in my car for over a year now. Baltic Supra on YouTube. Jay and the team here at Real Street Performance have been helping me for 8 or so years. And I mentioned earlier, they helped me get into the 8-second Street Supra, a huge dream of mine, a 7-second Street Supra, and I'm still here itching and wanting more. So I'm visiting the doctor once again. This motor, like Jay mentioned, was having some low oil pressure towards the last couple of runs that I did on it. So we're very curious to open it, hopefully find what went wrong, fix it, and get after it again, baby. Let's do it.
So I have a fancy smancy filter cutting tool, but I've loaned it out and I don't remember who I loaned it to. Someone needs a hacksaw. Everybody's got a hacksaw. You're gonna put some particulate in the filter when you cut it open with a hacksaw because you're cutting the can. But what you're really after is gonna be in the paper. So don't get too caught up if you cut a filter open and there's a little bit of stuff in it. It may be just from what you've done here. And the real damage would be in the paper once we spread it open, but we'll get there. So the way a filter flows is the oil is in through these small holes and out through the middle hole. So the particulate will only be trapped in one side of the paper. So you gotta have to tear at it to get it open. And then you can spread it open like an accordion. Notice the oil color is light, which means it hasn't been like cooked to death. And looking through the paper, it does not look like we have anything really worth talking about here, which is weird because we have an oil pressure problem.
Yeah, I mean,
so
it has one pass on this oil filter and the numbers are just so low that I chose not to run it anymore.
Right.
But we're talking a pass from 0 speed to 185 miles an hour. Like it's...
Yeah, but it's clean. So we'll keep digging. Maybe we haven't, and you did verify with a mechanical gauge, right. So we think that we have an actual problem, but there's not a bunch of bearing packed in the filter, right. Which is extremely good news because right. When you start doing that, that's when you start damaging crankshafts and camshafts and just everything. Once the oil is no longer really flowing through the engine, things get black and get converted to garbage really quickly.
So I think I continued to race the car, although the numbers weren't great, because this is someone who's never had sensors at all. Like I've ran your motors for years and years, 0 sensors whatsoever. So I finally put a sensor and the numbers weren't good. I'm like, why did I even bother? I shouldn't have done this. So I just kept at it. I kept cutting the filters open, it looked clean, and I kept racing it. And she ran strong to the very last day that I chose to pull it out and bring it here. So like Jay said, we'll keep digging and see what else we can find. Hang on.
Well, to be expected, the cams look awesome. Okay. So if you look at this, you know, this is the non-ramp. So all this part that's not touched is just lash.
Okay, so that darker color is perfectly normal?
Yeah, it never touches the bucket.
Okay.
Then this is the take-up ramp where it starts to meet the bucket.
Got it.
And then you have the peak of the lobe. But these lobes look really, really nice, which is pretty typical of a cast cam.
Yeah.
coated or uncoated on the Cam stuff, this stuff looks really good. Now what's puzzling about this is you have low oil pressure,
right,
and this is splash lubricated.
Right.
So oil comes up through a galley on this side of the block and feeds these camshafts, which bleed out oil onto the bucket. So there's no pressurized oil on any lobes, just splash. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you are reporting low oil pressure, but all the splash lubricated components that have seen over 8,000 RPM or 9,000 RPM,
even more,
or more, they all look good. Which, again, I would ask about the accuracy of the gauge, but you're saying that you checked it with a secondary gauge,
right?
So we'll keep digging.
Well, good thing I kept on racing.
The reason why we have a bushing in our tensioner is, see this galling and this corrosion? This will actually get to the point where it binds up. So you want to, we'll probably move you to one of our tensioners while we have it apart.
Yeah, by the time we get done with this, we're talking strokers, dry sumps, and other wild stuff.
Do you really want to go faster?
I do. I really do feel that the setup that I had could have gone faster, just how the car was.
Pedro says something that we all say to ourselves.
Yeah, every single drag racer.
Yep, every one of them.
I know.
The
second you get the ticket, say I wanted to go 730, the second you get that ticket and it says 733, you're like, oh man, I'm so close to the 20s.
Oh, so close.
That's easy. I don't know.
I've been there.
I mean, this is where I stand. I feel like, for example, like when I go to, say, Texas 2K, when I go to Florida 2K, I know from time to time they have like the 2JZ class. I never want to be a racer in, say, the 2JZ class, because in my eyes, leave that up to the shops. Like, I can't compete. I don't have the budgets to compete at that level, but I enjoy doing the street car shootouts. But even that, the street cars are getting crazy out of control. Like, commonly now at Texas 2K, Florida 2K, there'll be 6-second cars. And coming up this next year at Florida 2K, I anticipate there'll be easily 6-second cars in that class.
Yeah.
So I don't care to be the fastest, but I have to stay close enough to where hopefully a reaction light can get me that win.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll divide the classes up like they did in Texas.
I'm not trying to be in the slower class.
Well, I mean,
we got to make the top class. Whatever happens, happens then, but...
How do you feel about white?
What? Yeah, there he goes again. Salesman, huh?
I'm just trying to make it easy for you.
Listen, my channel is called Baltic Supra. It needs to be Baltic Blue.
You have a Jeep.
No, that is red.
Okay.
That is red.
So you are open for change. I understand. Thank you. Man, these cams look really nice. They look really, really nice. The Toyota bucket, BC cam, like there's nothing scary through that. That's really, really cool. Yeah, this stuff looks good. So like I was saying, the oil comes up the rear driver's side of the head, and then it goes across in this passage here, which feeds this, and then there's no oil flowing through the head, it's like flowing through the cam. And the fact that these front lobes and buckets look so good, it makes me wonder where your oil flow problem is. Because this stuff could get really nasty really fast without oil flow.
I could imagine. But teeing off to what you were saying, like this combination works really well. The combination that I had before, it was just a matter of time before.
Yeah, this stuff
we had failure.
It's the same stuff we use in our white car, and same stuff we use in Jared's car, and it's well sorted.
You guys at home, you know the deal. BC, these are 276 cams, right?
Yeah.
BC 276.
What's cool too is if you want to have them be really smooth at idle, you just idle it smooth. If you want to have that chop, you can just use the ignition timing correction to make them
more aggressive,
rappy, just sounding, but
right.
they're efficient. They're efficient cams. So this is just a ARP standard size 625 kit, which is the same thing we ran on our white Supra when we had gone into the 6s with the stock block. And it leaves a lot of material, you know, so you're not removing material out of the block or the cylinder head to go into a larger fastener. It's a stock size fastener, but it has enough clamping force to keep the head on the engine without any real problems. By the end of this engine combination, it really becomes a game of keeping the block from distorting as much. That's really where this ends for a stock block program, is the distortion.
So now that you speak on that, I now utilize, when I was going 750s a year ago, I had just motor mounts and factory motor mounts.
Yep.
I now utilize a mid plate. So I have a mid plate and still the factory motor mounts. I have no front plate. As I continue to push this further.
Yep. Mid plate's your friend because you can, you'll help remove some of that workload that the side engine mounts are doing. You know, when it's only mounted on the sides, you know, you really open yourself up for a lot of pulling and pushing on the engine block externally. And with the mid plate, you get a lot of that out of it. Now, ideally, you'd have a motor plate and a mid plate. That way the engine's kind of like in this floating state. But motor plates and accessory drives don't normally jibe together. So when you get into a motor plate, it can be done, but you have to get creative on
getting around the AC and getting
water
around
pump.
Water pump.
Yeah.
So with the mid plate, should I be utilizing, say, like a solid motor mount, or?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it's solid in the back. You know, you want to
locks everything in place.
You want to try to be uniform.
Okay.
It's about a uniform approach.
Okay.
More than anything. Yeah, the threads are pretty whacked up in there.
Yeah, I want
It's not
to beat
good.
up.
See that? Look what you've done. See this?
Yeah, like,
See this movement?
yeah.
So this gasket is pushed
that way?
this way.
How does that happen? Boost?
Yeah. So when you're getting coolant pressure, what you have is some combustion trace between the cylinders. The fire ring is intact, but the fire ring has no memory. It's just a chunk of metal, right? So you smash the head into the block with the fire ring and it doesn't flex at all. But when the parts start to flex, the fire ring stayed intact because you guys don't run this thing real hard because it's lower compression, you run good fuel, you have an experienced tuner. It's not like trying to blow itself up, you're just making a lot of power so the parts are moving. But this out here, this is when you said, hey man, it's making some coolant pressure. Yeah. This is it making some coolant pressure. You know, because a multi-layer steel gasket will maintain like 3 or 4 thousandths is the most of its memory. Once you get past 3 or 4 thousandths, it's going to blow up.
Right.
Well, these solid gaskets, they don't have any memory or any spring.
Right.
So anytime the parts move, you know, like when you let go of the trans brake and the turbo zings to 50 pounds of boost, and it's really starting to pull the car in motion, like you can make some pressure because that stuff's distorting. Yeah.
quick recap. The cams look nice. I was concerned about that. Cams look good, buckets look good. The oil filter came out clean. I'm surprised. What else? We found why we're building some coolant pressure. I run this thing hard, guys. I run it very hard. When I'm in competition, I never had sensors before, but even now that I do, they're all off, baby. Let the sensors say whatever they want to say. If we're in competition, we gotta win, at least do my best. So I run this thing recklessly. I always have. But so far, everything we see looks good. So I'm excited to see how the bottom end look. How the if these bearings are still in good shape or come out clean, I'm just gonna be like in shock. It's crazy. Jay builds a hell of an engine, and it truly takes everything that I throw at it. And that's why we have to go faster. Still looking for more. I still want more, man. Never thought I'd say that. After going to 7.3 at almost 190 miles an hour. I went 188 miles an hour on the parachute, and then I went another 188 at Florida 2K off the throttle like 30 or so feet before the finish. So the car was right there at 190 mile an hour trap speeds. And it's a car that I can take everywhere. I gave so many buddies rides, fans of our YouTube channel. I drove the car everywhere and enjoyed doing it.
And it still wasn't enough.
And it still wasn't enough, huh?
See this very complicated build day process we do today?
So even on here, this is probably just silicone.
This is not supposed to be there.
What was that?
It looks like a bolt out of the back of the oil pump.
Huh.
Just dropped it in there. But it was just laying on that baffle.
It's just potential signs of the oil pump
Something
saying
funny
too much
happening.
RPM.
Something funny. Another thing that you'd if you had an engine that was suspect low oil pressure, like you'd look at the pickup tube.
Yep.
Like, because if it's cracked, some engines pick up, not on JZs, but some engines pickup tubes will crack or fall out. So like, is this, that's tight. So,
or even like contaminants on here, this is super clean.
yeah.
So we're looking at a BC billet crank, some Real Street Performance billet main caps, R&R aluminum rods. Stuff looks beautiful.
I see your problem. Do you want to talk about it?
You see it?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, the oil pump's coming apart. Look at it.
Yeah. So all these bolts are unscrewing?
Yep.
Look at that.
And it's leaking.
So that must have happened like a while ago, because since the second I put the sensor, which is right after, like shortly after Texas 2K, I was already getting numbers in like the 50s.
Yeah, 50s is not kosher.
And that's what it was doing at peak RPM, like at best case, like when it should be reading the highest.
Yeah.
I was at 50s, and I was cruising around the street at like 10s and 20s. Like it'll never cruise at 40, 50s.
Yeah, it was leaking oil internally. That's why I was saying, like, if a squirter block off fell out, something was leaking inside the engine. Wasn't if the bypass, if the oil pump bypass was leaking, those are all things that could be contributing. I would venture to say, right now, your worst problem is that cylinder head spark plug.
Really?
Yeah, because if the oil looks this good and the oil filter is clean, like that stuff will be all good. Get that, hone the cylinders to get that corrosion out of it, push some fresh rings in it. Decide on whether or not, due to the age of the ring rods, if you want to replace them. But this is really cool because I was I was thinking on my way to work this morning, it would be a real shame to damage this crank. And the as long as there's nothing, you know, we're still speculating heavily, but the oil looking this good is nice.
All right, guys, all these bolts are pretty much coming out by hand. They were all like that the second it came off the engine.
Yeah, there was a bolt. There's one of them in the.
So that one must have recently fell, or it could have.
Well, it could have fallen.
Oh, I see. Just made it down there, stayed down there.
It's kind of an oddity on these engines. You can't take the oil pump off in the car.
I know.
Yeah. It's probably one of the whoopsies to it. Oh, dude, you're golden.
No way.
Yeah. You have some of the best luck of anyone I've ever met. I mean, of anyone I've ever met, it's so ridiculous, man.
No.
God, can I just stand behind you and buy some lottery tickets?
Yeah. Ain't that something?
Ain't that something?
And even at like Florida 2K, remember when I was having the fuel pump issue? I ran this motor through some pretty ugly abuse.
Right.
The bearings look awesome.
Yeah, the coating's starting to give way. But you could see the ignition timing. Like, see this where the bearing looks different? That's where the most cylinder pressure occurs. The skirt coating will sacrifice as needed.
Right.
You know, it's just a lubricant coating. But when you look at the pistons, like, see this little bit where it's worn off?
Right.
And the same thing over here. They're basically even. Okay. Well, as the piston's traveling up the bore, and the combustion is fighting it, see how this one's a little less even?
Right.
There's a little bit more skirt. But when you look at the piston, see these lines that are going across it?
I see them, yeah.
Those are for oil
You
retention.
feel them too, right? Yeah, you feel them.
That's for oil to sit in there and lubricate the part and keep oil around on the cylinder wall and this and that. So same thing here. Pretty uniform. Pretty uniform. Pretty uniform. Pretty uniform. With all 6 pistons and all 6 rod bearings looking so nice and uniform, you know, again, you have enough fuel for the compression ratio and the engine is tuned well, you know, which is similar to what we said last time. Now the car's making a lot of power, so there are some things still going wrong, you know, with that, what we talked about before with the head gasket and the cooling system stuff. But any flange seal deal is going to have some flex at the seal. You know, it's just one of the disadvantages of most engines have head gaskets. So, but what's pretty cool is how uniform the ring is in the head, and where these problems are happening. It's not a gross problem. You're still racing the car. But I would say that when the head gets serviced, you know, a couple thou will come off the head, a couple thou will go off the block, and you'll go back at it again.
Right.
As long as we can make a nice repair on that spark plug hole. But again, hats off to the team, because you have, you guys are not running this thing so hard that it's blowing up. You know, most guys, you know, like, I don't know how many times the car's been in the 7s, but it was more than once. It was not you don't have a one-hit wonder.
This car?
Right.
You want me to walk outside and get the time tickets? The time slips?
You got a stack of them?
Yeah, man.
I'm just saying, that's high five, man.
Yeah,
this is
man,
really cool, because a lot of people they hit like a little glory bump.
Yep, I agree.
And then they ride it for a long time, and you've gone 7s a lot, which is pretty exciting. And then for these parts to look so nice, you know, like, again, you could replace the rods based off of their age,
right.
or we can put them back in the engine. I mean, you don't have to, I wouldn't change any of those bearings or anything, just put them back in the engine. Yeah. Yeah, I want to put rings in it and re-hone it because of that corrosion in the bore. But otherwise, that stuff looks really
Based on what you're seeing, you're thinking pistons and rods could still have some life in them?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
Holy
so we'll
smokes.
get the crank out, look at the main bearings, and then we can have a wrap. But off of memory, how many times do you think it's been in the 7s? 10?
Way more than 10. At Florida 2K alone, I went 7s like 6 runs.
Okay.
The weekend before that, or a couple days before, I was testing at Florida 2K, and it went 7s 2 or 3 times. But I mean, almost every pass, like 7s has become easy.
Yeah.
Like for me to run an 8, I either have to spin, which the car doesn't normally do, or I literally almost have the boost controller off. I never anticipated to have a car that ran like this.
And it's still not enough.
And it's still not enough. Prairie's family, I'm hooked. He knew this would be the outcome when he started helping me with my engine program years ago. I just keep coming back and back. And here's the thing though, every time once the car was running, once everything was in there, I was perfectly satisfied. But the second my car ever comes apart, it just hurts to put it back how it was. Like, if I'm gonna go through the effort of tearing it all apart, putting it all back together, it has to be better in some shape or form. Like,
yeah,
a little faster.
To race. It's easy to race a T4 car. Like, think of how easy your turbo spools and all that stuff. Like, the faster you go, the more work it becomes. That's all.
Well, now that we're talking about that, I should reveal that I sold that turbo. Yozdani, our good friend Yozdani from the Supra Racing channel, has actually bought that turbo from me, an 8685 that I bought here from Real Street Performance. Incredible turbo. Had the OCD Works mod, polished cover. It's a beauty. It's now living life in Yozdani's car. And towards the end of this build, I wanted to talk about my next turbo.
What's your next turbo?
I want to go bigger, man.
Does it start with a P?
It does start with a P. I'm thinking Pro Mod, maybe like a Pro Mod 88. You know, like a baby Pro Mod. Just something that give me another
couple hundred horsepower
more than what I was using before. Because I was already finding myself spraying on top of maximizing my 8685. So if I can get something that won't need the spray, then eventually I might spray it. But
So what I'm looking to do is make as much power as I used to make without nitrous.
Yeah.
And then add nitrous again.
Yeah. In case I really needed it.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to see how it feels.
It's a drug. Listen, it's a bad drug. This is my only hobby. And I don't know, I'm just hooked. Man, those few seconds of adrenaline. At night, not even at night, my drive home, I'll be at Bradenton, my drive home, I'm like calling buddies, like, you won't believe it, the car did, it did this to the 8th mile, I did this to the 60 foot, it back half this strong, like this is just, it's what we love to do. I don't think I could ever get away.
Man, this thing looks good.
That's wild. That is wild.
That's just like out of the box. You change your oil a lot?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, the oil I was using was off the shelf. I was not on the HPL, but I was just using off the stuff I could buy at AutoZone, but changing it very, very often. And after I spoke to Eric at HPL, he's like, honestly, if you had a good enough oil, you wouldn't have to go through it as often. So once this motor's back together, it will be ran on HPL oil. I love my 1-ethanol-R. That's the only fuel I run in the car now. But yeah, like you said, I'm grateful for this engine program, my tuner, just the team that I've put together. The very last pass in the car, I ran 40 pounds of boost, which again, the car has seen 60 and it has seen nitrous on top of that 60. But at 40 pounds of boost, I turned the nitrous off. I left at 17 pounds of starting line. I told the spray to turn off at 35 pounds of boost. So within 0.3 of a second, there was no nitrous.
Yeah.
So I run 150 shot, a quarter of a second in, nitrous was off. I ran 40 pounds through the traps. Car went at 759 at 182 or 83 miles an hour. 40 pounds, no spray.
It would live forever like that.
Yeah, but who wants to do that? Like,
right, so there's a little bit of micro welding on some of these mains.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go up to a 625 main stud now.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just see it. See this right here? On these engines, this number 5 is always the worst.
Okay.
But if we grab the number 5 cap.
So I'm currently utilizing a 625 head stud.
Head stud,
but
not the main stud.
Got it.
So we have a 625 main we'll get you set up with.
Okay.
But one thing that's pretty cool is if you put the cap back into the register,
right,
it's still tight. See that?
Yeah.
When you really beat the nonsense out of these things, it'll get to the point where the cap will just fall in and out, like loose. So you have a little bit of movement there, but it's not anything terrible. So we'll go ahead and get the upgraded main studs in there. And when you change the main studs, you have to align hone because the fastener tension changes the distortion of the parts.
Okay.
So we'll check the align hone in the process, but not a big deal. So we've got the engine apart, and the damage list consists of an oil pump. One spark plug thread hole is pretty damaged. That may require an insert. The head gasket was leaking some combustion. The bearings look good, the pistons look good, crank looks great. Everything looks really good as far as the rotating assembly, which is a really nice surprise because of the oil pressure concerns he had. The block will have to get decked minimum. The head will be decked minimum. We'll have to align hone for the stronger main hardware because whenever you change the main hardware, it changes the distortion of the tunnel, which then you align hone to get everything back true. But it looks like we will reuse rods, pistons, and bearings and the crank. So all that stuff looks good. So we have a pretty, I guess not a very exciting amount of damage to report.
It's exciting to my wallet.
It's exciting to his wallet.
But he's going to counter that. Yes, I'm going to counter that.
He's going to counter that luck.
With a larger turbo. Yeah. Listen, here I was thinking I was running this motor to its absolute limit. I'm like, man, I'm reckless. I'm running this way too aggressive, way too hard. We look into here, and I'm running it with a half-broken oil pump. The thing was making no oil pressure, and meanwhile, the bearings look new. Everything in here looks practically new. So I can't kill one of your engines. I gotta run them harder. So I'm gonna do so with a larger turbo, more nitrous, more abuse. Let's get after it, baby.
That's all his idea.
Yeah.
Anyhow, appreciate it. We'll get this thing back together and get him back to the track going fast.
See you guys at the next racing event.